So can I officially welcome you to this EMCC Global Dialogue. It's great to see so many of you here today, and we're here today with Paula Nacif talking about or leading a discussion on fostering wellbeing in teams and organisations. I'm really excited to have Paula with us here today. So she's an EMCC Global Master Practitioner, a really experienced executive and group coach, consultant, facilitator, and loads of experience in coaching for leadership, wellbeing and career transition, and a coach supervisor with a massive expertise in groups as well. So brilliant person to lead this fantastic dialogue. And without any further ado, I shall hand you straight over.
Thank you, Nicola. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it's a real pleasure to be here talking about group coaching and wellbeing, which are definitely the two things I enjoy most in my life. So it's really, thank you for having me. And welcome everyone, and it's really nice to see you all here. And I can see some familiar names. I can't see everybody's faces, but I can see some familiar names here. So really, really good to see you all. What I had planned is that I will share some of the things I thought would be important to get us started in a discussion. And we will have a couple of breakout rooms, and we have space for you to share your thoughts as well and ask any questions that you have. So let's just get started. We tried this before and it worked with the sharing of the screen. So let's try again. Hopefully it will work. Yeah. Okay, fab, from the beginning. Well, what is happening in wellbeing organizations, and why being here today and talking about wellbeing organizations and potentially how we can use group coaching to support is this, that we know that wellbeing, employee engagement and productivity are all linked. The fluid workplace practices that we've seen since COVID have had and still having an impact on people's well-being, and teams and organizations. I work with organizations of all shapes and sizes. It hasn't settled yet, and some of you who might be working in organizations may know that. You might be having conversations with managers and staff. They're still trying to figure out how to navigate this world, and there's been having an impact on people's well-being and specifically their engagement. There is a challenge in terms of fostering and sustaining connections in organizations in the new world, and of course that has an impact on well-being. That has an impact on the work space, the environment, the climate, and all of that, all of those things that we know is really important. And there is a culture of overwork. So for the very first time, the World Health Organization has added overwork to their reports, and 1/3 of occupational disease burden worldwide is due to overwork. And that's a lot. People are definitely going off sick and having a lot of health issues as a result of overwork. And what is overwork for the World Health Organization? Are people working 55 hours or more? And it's worldwide. So I was looking, of course, there are regional and countries and differences there. However, it is widespread. And here is the paradox, right? The paradox is that we know that more organizations are interested in supporting the well-being of employees. So a CIPD report published last year, they went off and talked to a lot of organizations, and what they found is that organizations were more interested in supporting the well-being of employees, and they were doing something about it, because it's important as well, isn't it? Just wanting to do something is very different from actually doing it. So what the CIPD identified, that more organizations were actually having proper well-being strategies. So they were looking strategically about how to support the well-being of their people. They're interested in that, and more employees are experiencing stress and burnout as a result of unhealthy working practices. So that's the paradox. And I think that's where potentially there is a room there for coaching and group coaching specifically. And we discussed why to support that work. There is more that is needed, and I think those of you on the call, perhaps you recognize that, but organizations recognize that there is a lot of impact on their retention, as absenteeism and so on. So they really have a real interest to support their employees. So that is so just in terms of figures, it may not, 745,000 people died in 2016. This comes from a report published last year. So although the data is 6 years old, we don't have any data. I could not find a data that is more recent than that, because the report was published last year. And so the World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, looking at the people working 55 hours or more a week, literally having heart attacks and strokes and so on. And the picture is really grim when you start digging in this area. And some of you may also have experienced work with your clients that overwork and that the demand of work in relation to people's resources, it seems to be a very endemic thing. Is in different industries, some more than others, but it seems to be everywhere. So there is a real opportunity there to work and help organizations and help people. And the way I'm looking at it in terms of the group coaching is really embedding better work practices in organizations. So one-to-one, it can work with individuals and it can help them individually. But what we need, because of this paradox that we see, is that we need things which have a ripple impact and have an impact on potentially how the system is working. We can't change everything through coaching, but we can get started. So that's our first breakout room. So I've given you a kind of a context why this is important. And so I would like you to have a chat about, why do you think group coaching might be one of a tool that organizations and teams can use to support this agenda, to really help people and organizations. Nicola, over to you. Have you got your rooms?
I've got all the rooms sorted out. Just a last call for anybody who doesn't want to be in a breakout room, just rename yourself NBR. And I'm opening up the rooms for, is it 10 minutes in total, Anna Paula?
Yeah, 10 minutes is good. Yes, if it's some fairly small groups, so people have a chance to really share their views.
Wonderful. I shall see you in 10 minutes.
Welcome, everyone. So let's see, what have you discussed? Any feedback, any comments from your breakout rooms and from your discussions?
Hi, Anna, nice to see you.
Hello, Mariangela, nice to see you too.
Our group actually discussed, when we started out discussing all in a sudden team coaching. And so the question was, what's the difference between team coaching and group coaching? And why would people come together as a group instead of as of a team? And what is the takeaway, or what is the benefits from group coaching? And then we went into different ways of looking at what the benefits could be, even though groups might not have the same objective to attain as a group. Contrary to teams, they might have personal issues to address. Nevertheless, being in a group might open up ideas or open up new perspectives to address those issues in a different way. That's about, in a nutshell, what we discussed.
Thank you, Mariangela. Anybody else? Heather.
Yeah, we discussed very similar. There was only one person in the group that does group coaching. The other two of us were sort of coming along to find out more about it. But we were defining it between groups and teams in the fact that a group can come along, but you help build them into a team, because when they come along, they may not be getting on very well. And that's usually why they're coming to you as for group coaching. But you actually then work with them to build them into a team, so that they're working well together. And we don't always bring our whole selves into work. So group coaching allows you to bring your whole self, and then you can start to be a bit more vulnerable within the group and the team, and learn from other people's stories within it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's sort of where we covered.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hello.
Hi, Dorota. Hello. Hi. Nice to see you.
Yes, nice to see you too, and everyone. So, in our group, we also talked about this belonging to a group and belonging to the common challenge and change. So, being part of a group can support people in the motivation and just understanding that not only me have a problem, but it's something that others experience too. So it's good to have that that feeling of belonging and being just normal and going through the change together. So this is also what I experience in my groups too. That I just shared that some of my groups ask to have a messenger or a WhatsApp group even to be in touch in between the sessions, so they can really like have that feeling of and the possibility to be in touch. And yeah, so that was, I think, and we also talked about challenges and in terms of well-being, that even in the beginning, there is a high motivation and understanding that the topic is a topic for coaching and for group coaching as well. Then the challenge is the consistency of approach and really making the change happen in life, in people's lives, so they can really change the approach to how they work and balance various activities of life. So this is mostly what we covered.
Thank you very much, Dorota. Patricia.
Well, I think this is interesting, and to hear everyone's different experience, and I'd love to hear a little bit about what you have to say on this point of differentiation between team coaching and group coaching. I have done both, and I find team coaching particularly a tricky place to be, whereas group coaching, my experience, and I'm sure it's different, some people probably talk about group coaching for team coaching, but I coach individuals coming together as a group, mastermind group, and everyone is working on their own objective. And then I see more of what Dorota just was mentioning, this binding together, because each one is working on their own theme. Whereas in team coaching, I understand there's usually a group focus. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about the differentiation and what that means for the coach.
Yes, absolutely, Patricia. It was something that I was going to pick up on. You're absolutely right. So when we work with teams, there is an agenda for that team that usually is given by the organization, and the team is there to fulfill that agenda. So they have a collective goal. They may have different roles to play in relation to fulfilling and meeting the targets and the goals, but they are working towards a common objective. Whereas when we think about group coaching, we're thinking about a bunch of people who work in the same organization, if you're doing that within organizations, but they don't necessarily belong to a team. They could be across different teams, across different functions, and across hierarchy. And that's the beauty of it. And that is when you get the benefit of trying to influence the system, because they're trying to change practices. So there is two very different positive outcomes that could come from that. The individuals themselves improve their well-being, but also the practices for the organization. People who start thinking about that in a different way and sharing some of those challenges which are experienced across. And that is one of the things that I think it's really important. So there is that differentiation. If I share my next screen, you see, which is you know, why group coaching? I think that, you know, the answer's in the pictures, folks. And I'll tell what they mean. There is something about creating connections, and as I said before, the world of work that's changed dramatically. In some organizations and teams and so on, they're finding really difficult to keep engaged and connected because of the different work practices. So if you get people together, so group coaching can fulfill that role. Of course, there's no silver bullet, and you can't do everything for everyone, but there is that sense of belonging. And I think Dorota mentioned groups remaining together, creating groups outside the group coaching, and kind of keeping that going for them. Then there is the sense of connection across the organization. So if you have functions and managers and teams and people across a whole organization experiencing challenges in the well-being, some of the challenges I mentioned before, they are systemic challenges. People who are working, overworking, and it's not something that's happening in one organization, is systemic, and the figures are quite dramatic when we look at it. So we're connecting those dots and trying to create something that's larger than the group and larger than the individual, and then hopefully the ripple impact. So people will benefit from it. They will go and talk to each other, and they will then have an influence that goes beyond the self. And of course, there is a lot of benefit in the group itself. So what are the benefits that we know? And that comes from the research that's being carried out. We do need a lot more research in group coaching, but there is enough literature there to really support our work as coaches, and for organizations interested in that. It does support culture change for the reasons I've described. So instead of working with one person at a time, which is individual coaching is really important. I'm not saying one or the other. I'm saying individual and group and team. That culture change, because you work with people across hierarchy and across the organization. There is that promotes connection. It's scalable. So let's face it, it's in terms of cost, in terms of helping more people. So running groups has that impact. There is something about individual and collective learning, and that being shared across. So if we compare with individual coaching, the learning there for me is an individual, and yes, I may share with a colleague, but when we're working in groups, you tend to have that collective learning that is more, it could potentially be embedded in normalized individuals' experiences, because we all have a shared narrative of whatever that might be, or we may have different challenges, but we're there together to improve the well-being, not only potentially of ourselves, but our teams, and we can really think in that collective contribution. So those are the kind of the benefits that we know from the research. And it's really what kind of contributions we can have. And I'm just going to share this with you, and then potentially you can ask questions, but also then you can have a conversation. On the right side of your screen is just, there are many ways of devising and designing well-being strategies. The key thing is that well-being strategies must be aligned to organizational needs and objectives and aims. And one way of doing it is to tackle 3 different areas: physical well-being of your employees, social well-being, and psychological well-being. That is one way of doing it, and I'm sure there are people from organizations here. You may have this model, or you may have a different model. But the thing is, when we think about well-being strategy for organizations, there's a strategic document, and it's about a strategic thinking. And we really want to make sure that organizations can really think about what is it that they are getting out of their well-being strategy? What is it that they need to tackle? What are their most immediate needs? Not just for, of course, the organization, but in tandem with what do our people need, and how we can support them and how we can help them. We would like to think the organizations will do that because it's the right thing to do. and some do. However, there is a real bottom line here. So there is a business case for supporting well-being in organizations. And what are our contribution as coaches? So what kind of solutions group coaching can bring to the organization? So we can think of two distinct areas. The first area is the kind of specific topics or demographic. So you can work with new parents, or parenting is a very stressful time for people's lives, and that can support them, and therefore you support their well-being, and you have, you know, the workplace benefits from that. You have people who go off sick potentially, or have had a major event happening in their lives. They go off for a period of time. When they return to work, they might need some support in terms of getting back to work, and as well as looking after their health, especially if they have had a serious illness, for example. So there is a lot of staggering back and stages and so on, and groups can be really supportive for that. One of the crucial things about the workplace is people with long-term health conditions. Now, I'm looking in the files of my brain, and I can't remember the right statistics, but there is a significant percentage of people in work who live with a physical or a mental health condition, a long-term physical or mental health condition. And it is a challenge for organizations, and we know that, and reports have explored that, because if I have a long-term health condition, I need support. I may need support. I may need adaptation for work, but I need to manage my health. Right, this is the top of my mind as an employee, so I can work. You know, it makes sense. I look after myself, so I'm the best I can be for my work. So having that support, it can be something really important. And because there are many of us in that situation, then group coaching will be a really helpful thing. There are generic wellbeing programs, and organizations have run those programs in the past, where they have, especially during the pandemic, people struggling or feeling isolated, or struggling with energy and so on. Just generic wellbeing programs, managing stress and so on. And you may have others that you can add to that list. The opportunities are really endless. You need to look at the people you're working with, their members of staff, and see what their needs are, and then fulfill their needs aligned with the organization needs. From an organization's perspective, we can work with groups of managers and leaders to really think about their working practices. So then we're kind of tackling the paradox. Well, we want to look after our people, but actually they're getting ill. So we need to do something different here that is beyond the individual. That is the system, those are the practices, the culture of the place. And having those conversations in groups can be really, really supportive of change, because then, especially if people have the levers and the influence to go and think, well, okay, what can we do different here? And how can we support each other in making those changes? Because remember, managers and team leaders and leadership teams are also under pressure. And they are having their own well-being challenges themselves. So they're not immune to that. I mean, across organizations, I don't think well-being is something that happens to a particular part of the organization. It is across the organization. And then the beauty of being able to work across teams, functions, and geographies. And you find, if you work across geographies, if you work with large organizations, the perspectives are amazing, because they're different, and people bringing new ideas, new ways of working, and they share that, and there is a richness in that. That is the beauty for me of group coaching, and that sense of belonging and inclusion that groups can bring, and has an impact for impacts to organization and well-being. And last but not least, that we can work with coaching models that are based on well-being theories and evidence-based practice. when we go into organizations to do this work, we're bringing in this knowledge of well-being and use the knowledge and models that can help organizations in all these different aspects. So different layers, the individual, the group, the team, the functions, and then ultimately the organization. Okay, I've said enough now. I've shared a lot of ideas. Let's get you back to your breakout rooms, and what might be, how can you and what would you like to do, and in terms of either if you are from an organization, what would you like to see more of, and if you're a coach or developing your coaching offer, how can you include more one-to-many interventions to support the well-being of teams and organizations? Over to you, Nicola.
Thanks, Anna Paula. And I've just put those questions as well. I've just popped them onto a Google Doc, and there's a link in the chat as well, so you should be able to get straight over there.
Brilliant,
right, so open up the breakout rooms again. Oh, I've just seen an MBR just move around there. Marvellous. Are we going out for 10 minutes again, Anna?
Yes. I lost track of time. Yes, 10 minutes. Yeah, we've got time. Let's do that.
Welcome back. No, it's nice to see everybody all pinging back after a breakout room. You always look so wow. Anyway, let me hand you over to Anna Paula.
Yes, well, welcome back, everyone. So your thoughts, comments about how you can support that work or would like to support that work.
So I'm ready to share on behalf of our group. I worked with Nadia and Madalena, and it was actually exciting and stimulating to admit that as much as some of us are working more like individual coaches and or team coaches, that there is actually this new planet or like a new world opening for us, I guess, for the benefit of people in organizations and making them live better and work better. So we were really sharing our excitement and also pros and cons of group coaching, and that how it can work alongside with the other ways of supporting organizations. And 10 minutes was not enough to share everything, but I guess we do on our own levels have some materials to think. And personally, I already have a client in mind where I'm thinking how I could be offering something new. And I haven't shared with the colleagues, but I will share with you that I'm thinking maybe to, as an external person, work alongside with their internal coaches and maybe create like a couple, so like a tandem, two people working with a group. So there will be even like a new level of learning, because I think also how you as an external person are coming, you sort of bring something, and that the internal coaches can also learn. So that's on behalf of our group. If the ladies would like to add anything, or maybe we'll hear from other groups as well.
Thank you, Radomira. Thank you. Very exciting. Richard.
Hi, yes. Hello, everybody. I hope you're okay. Just very briefly, I was working with Nadine and Gail. We had some really interesting discussions at both sessions, and thank you both. I hope you don't mind me jumping in because we missed out on the first round. We talked about how challenging it is in the current business environment, particularly, I think, in the future in the UK, to balance the challenges financially that organizations are facing with the need, or rather the ability, to persuade people that coaching is a cost-effective approach to making change or supporting change in an organization around well-being. And I think also following that, it was interesting, this issue about, as an individual coach, how challenging it is to make an impact within organizations unless you have already very strong contacts within that type of business, or with contacts within that through your networks. And it's much more likely that they'll turn to larger consultancy groups and leadership teams for their coaching. So perhaps one of the ways is to become an associate of those groups if you can't do that already. We also felt there were a lot of companies who, and Nadine used the term greenwashing around well-being at the moment, that they have this in their strategy, but they have a sort of rather tick box mentality to bring in a coach or an organization to do some development for their teams, but actually it's just on the surface, and it has to start with the culture right from the top if it's going to have any impact at all. And then we thought, well, then that there's a duty almost on coaching and the coaching professional bodies, perhaps more so, to educate continuously the business environment as to what coaching actually is and what it can deliver. So we need to have some very good evidence base about the value of coaching and exactly what coaching is, because I still think that there is a wide variety of views on that and exactly what impact it could have. So I think, we need to get away from this view of we're somehow coming in and delivering tools and sorting out organizations in terms of perhaps particularly mental health issues for some of the individuals, which we can't do. We're not there as counselors or mental health practitioners. Most of us aren't anyway. So I think it's getting to the core of what is the value of coaching, what impact can that make, and what is the value to the organization of group coaching in these difficult times. It's a paradox, like you said earlier, very difficult, challenging times, but it's exactly when coaching could have a major impact.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. I think you've gone ahead and touched upon many of the barriers of this work, which was the last question that I had for today. And if we would be doing this all together, I wasn't going to send you to breakout rooms. So you've identified some of the barriers there. And I agree that there is a lot of, is it greenwash, that the word that you use, that is lip service, isn't it? That is why there is a paradox. Organizations go off and they have a strategy, but how they implement that strategy may not be the best in the benefit of employees. However, there is a real business case here for well-being, and organizations know that, for levels of people going off sick, and they have to recruit or and so on. So when it does get to that state, then they start thinking about it perhaps more from a business-led mind than just the benefit of having a positive leadership stance, which is the right thing to do, to look after your people and make sure that they are healthy and well. And in terms of large organizations, my experience in the UK, it's mixed. Some of the large organizations are commissioning large consultancies to do this work. Others still have room for smaller coaching providers. Not everyone, but there is some room is still in that market, if you like, and working as an associate is always an option as well. And I think that in terms of the cost benefit of group coaching, that is something that we can use to our advantage, that it is more cost effective to work this way, perhaps, than having one-to-one coaching. And I want to make it really clear, I'm not saying group coaching instead of, I'm saying group coaching alongside other things as part of an overarching well-being strategy. Thank you, Richard. That was very thorough. Others, please.
So I can go on, just sharing one idea I got. I was sharing in our group. I was with Derek and with Robert. Yes, with Robert and with Derek. About a client who is a corporate client, and I have individual coaching still for managers. And the repetitive theme is also the self-care and the balance in life. And I work on that topic with them individually, but I think that I will also share with the HR business partner, who is my direct contact, that I see that opportunity to, since the topic is repetitive, to I would just call her and tell her that why not to think about a group coaching specifically dedicated to the well-being, and just opening that opportunity for managers or other professionals. So I will just call and tell to her why not to open up for that idea, and I will see.
Yeah, thank you.
But sometimes I see you just share ideas with the people and they just, you never know. So without much really thinking, but just like that on spot.
Sometimes it takes time for ideas to kind of mature. I've had clients that took over a year before I actually worked with them from the moment I approached them for something. And I think there is one of my clients that it took 3 years. But I usually choose the people I want to work with. So I'm kind of like a stalker in a positive way. I follow their work and I approach them ever so often thinking, I still want to work with you. I really like what you do. You know, some of them eventually relent and others don't. So there is a limit to what we can do in terms of persuasion. There is a question in the chat from Patricia about the pricing point of group coaching. That is as long as it's a piece of string, because it really depends on this. The way I price my work, it depends on the size of the organization. It depends on what type of organization it is. So I would, for example, I would have different prices for a commercial organization and a not-for-profit organization. Mm-hmm. And I tend to think, what would be the fee for a workshop or a training session? And I would use the same as a price point to that. Mm-hmm. Because that is what is, to me, is the most similar, that they have a group of people in that room. And I know that it's so difficult to talk about pricing, isn't it? Because when you look at the surveys out there, you've got people charging from 50 to, I think the last one was £2,000 per session or something. The last one that they came out a few years back, that was the Ridley report. That they're not published anymore. I think the ICF is getting some information about it. They are going to be putting together a report soon. So that is how I do. And I think, Patricia, it might be different prices across different countries as well. So if you're based in different countries, the value of coaching, or the fee for coaching. What I would say is not like, let's say you charge, I don't know, in an organization, you charge £200 per session for an individual coaching. If you have 10 people, you're not going to be charging £2,000 for that session. Mm-hmm. You're not multiplying. But you're thinking about the time that you would have to prepare that, and how would you price your whole, if you're delivering a group coaching session that will last, I would say, if you're doing it online, potentially 90 minutes would be the group coaching session, the maximum time.
Not much, huh?
Yeah, face-to-face is probably longer. Sorry, mm-hmm. Patricia, I missed what you said.
That's thanks for answering these questions and putting these things on the table, because timing, that was going to be the end of my question, was how long do you see working with a group when we're talking about our strategies for reaching out? How long, 6 months do you work with a group when you put your first proposal out there? And also this proportion between individual and group. So it's very interesting what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah. So I tend to create 6-session group coaching programs, because then there is a kind of a beginning, middle, and end for that group process to happen, and the organization knows that as well, and they can then use a thematic approach to group coaching, as I suggested in the slide. It could be working with people with long-term health conditions. It could be working with new parents. It could have a generic well-being if people are having that problem. And I would get organizations to really think about what is it that they need, and align that, because then there is what Richard said, like, well, then there is a real reason for them to invest in that, and show to them that there is a potential scalability, and costs are less than they would have for one-to-one.
Can I just jump in and follow that up with because this is also in the strategy of developing one-to-many work, particularly in the corporate world, in a team. And when things come to the point of, it looks like there's some particular personality, which we often see in a group when you look at group constellations, a particular provocateur personality. How do you cope with that then?
It depends. It depends on the dynamic that you have in the group. And one of the things about coaching in groups is really developing a sense of self-awareness about how you would react, and then don't do that and respond instead of reacting. So is that lagging point between this is happening in the group and let me just respond to this. And what you find is that sometimes groups have a natural way of, they're always seeking an equilibrium. And they might raise to the challenge of that particular person. And of course, if there is a real issue, then you take, the way I would, if there is a real issue in a group or someone really hindering the progress of the group, I would speak to them outside the group.
Thank you very much for those points. I think it helps to see exactly how to build a strategy with the emergency doors open for issues that could come up and not be caught off guard.
Yes, absolutely. I know we're kind of on top of the time. I'm going to be here for another 15 minutes, and we haven't really addressed some of the barriers. We've addressed some of them. So if I can just quickly mention some of the barriers, in addition to those that they've already mentioned, is the organization's lack of understanding of what group coaching is a barrier. So they don't know what that is. They might misunderstand that, and they might think that's training or some other group, something else. Our coaching and our own understanding as coaches of what group coaching is, and we can go into organizations and deliver this work, knowing the challenges that, as Patricia has mentioned. And I think there might be a case, as Richard said, for coaching bodies to start talking a little bit more about this group coaching, because when you look at just recently, last year, there was the EMCC developed a whole competence around team coaching, and I was looking in Envy. Nicola, that's a kind of a hint, because I'm thinking I need something like that for groups. There are some similarities, yes, there are, but it's not the same. It really isn't. And those of us who work with groups and teams, it is not the same. So we need that, perhaps a little bit more positive promotion of group coaching for the right reasons, and really understanding where it adds value. And so there is an understanding, and there is us developing our competencies as group coaches and really understanding where we can then add value. And for me, clearly, in any type of coaching, that this alignment, so the organizations and coaches work together to understand how we can help each other and really align programs with organizational needs, because then I'm thinking about what Richard said, then you can actually say, actually, we're helping you with staff out there, and we kind of adding, just think about the cost of people going off sick, the cost of recruiting people and so on, against the cost of investing in coaching in general, not just groups, to support their staff. And I bet there'll be quizzing if they do that, if they do the maths, and sometimes we can help them to do that. There might be other barriers as well. So that's just quickly me just trying to wrap up this morning's talk, and thank you for being here and staying. Any other questions? I know, Nicola, over to you. I'll be here for another 10 minutes or so.
I was going to say, this has just been so rich. It really has. That, I mean, I know we set, because we said like an hour for the session, half an hour for networking. I am totally happy if everybody collectively here wants to edge into that networking to continue the discussion together, and then we'll just make the networking a little bit shorter if that comes to it.
Any questions then, perhaps, if you, let me see, is there any?
I've got a question actually, if I may ask one. It's around this point about knowing in advance what the avoiding, I'm wording this badly because I've got it here, but I haven't worked out how to say it. A bit of an early warning system so that you can see perhaps your teams or your groups together are heading towards some kind of crisis, with a well-being crisis, and you can intervene now to save that problem later on. And whether anybody is currently using any maybe early warning detection type mechanisms at the moment, or any pulse surveys, or any just check-ins at the moment, so that you can see a pattern about to happen before it does, and so to work at that quite upstream level. And I was wondering if anybody has come across anything like that which they've found useful.
Some organizations talk about well-being in their staff development plan, but the problem is they have that once a year. A lot happens in 12 months. And sometimes you see effort in organizations. So I've worked with a higher education institution, and they established well-being champions. They worked really hard to develop awareness around well-being, but they had buying across the organization. They invested time. It's not just about investing financial resources, it's time and people engaging in the work, because it can be taxing when you implement it. So they've done that, and they would be a fantastic case study of how putting efforts pays. And then you've got others kind of ad hoc, but not really planned. I don't know other people in the call if you've come across people really thinking about this and really embedding it, which is what we would like to see, what I'd like to see, that is the strategy is embedded and is live and is real, not lip service or greenwash or whitewash.
I don't know of any specifically, but I often think that group coaching itself can be a bit of a barometer, or could perhaps be used as a bit of a barometer across an organisation. So whilst totally respecting the confidentiality of the individuals within it, there is something about helping people to kind of make the invisible visible, isn't there, in group coaching? So you can kind of recognise yourself more in hearing other people's words. I think that's one of the greatest powers of group coaching. And I wonder if it can be a way for the organisation to also hear that. So using group coaching itself as a bit of a barometer, which you could have that as touch points across the organisation, across cultures, across, to really see if you could somehow retain the confidentiality and total safety of those spaces, whilst also using it as a barometer at the same time.
Yes, that would be very similar to some of the one-to-one work that you do, depending on the size of the organization, where you identify patterns that you can report back to the commissioner or the person who organized the coaching. And if it's a large organization, yes, you can do that. If it's a small organization, if it's just a one-off group, then it's more difficult, because they know the information will come from that particular group they're running, if you're running just one. But it is a great point, and is a point as well, getting managers, leaders in the conversation via group coaching, because they also have their challenges in terms of implementing what we're talking about, and the pressure, the tension between what is it that we do, and is well-being going to remain on top of our priority list, or is it going to go down because we've got all these things coming at us, and we're firefighting all the time, and the well-being goes down until it becomes an urgent problem.
I think there are many stats that organizations gather that could help to give some indication of the state of the nation, as it were, in an organization. I mean, there are lots of occupational health and safety statistics, like absences, job vacancies, productivity levels, all sorts of things, particularly where stress is listed as an issue. I mean, I always remember in my occupational health and safety days, you can't use stress theoretically as a, you know, it's not the reason why people are ill, but it is perhaps a causal factor. But I think also there's an opportunity in the way in which organizations develop their strategies. If well-being really is a key area, it should be reflected in all aspects of the organization's work. For example, equality, diversity, inclusion issues, for example, could have a very significant well-being aspect to it. Mental health awareness and support could have a very strong well-being issue, clearly. And in fact, at an institution I worked in, the university, we used the mental health awareness strategies that they had to introduce coaching to support wellness and well-being. So we piggybacked on that in terms of introducing coaching as an opportunity. And there's also the issue of where they had major issues of retention of staff. We used group coaching there to help identify what were some of the issues that had led to retention difficulties. So there are different ways in, I think, and I think it also depends on the type of organization as well as how open they are to be truly innovative about well-being and welfare. Yeah, I'll stop there. I talk too much.
No. Thank you, Richard. That's very, very good. Is anybody else has any experience from organizations where they think that they've seen or experienced a real effort, engagement, strategic level?
What comes to me when you were looking for that is this notion of their perspective of their own organization and what they're seeing, what they can see and what they can't see. And for example, I've been invited to work in an organization where they wanted storytelling. They wanted storytelling to make more memorable communication. Okay. And I began by listening to certain recordings and by working with them. And in fact, their communication problem wasn't that they didn't have a storytelling arc. It had much more to do with what they were trying to really communicate and the differentiation between teams they're not industries, but divisions in an organization where their way of working, the IT people are very different than the marketing people or than the designers. And how do for me, it was a much more of a cultural communication issue than just how can I tell a better story? Yes, it's a great learning how to tell a better story, and it gets more captivating. But first, what is your real issue? Is the designers are not particularly interested in the IT ends of it, and vice versa. So I find it looking at the approach to well-being is really very, very different.
Yeah, and I when you say that, what comes to my mind is the urgency, and then organizations start to pay attention. So what we quite recently, there was someone, I'm thinking about the consultancy firms, there's been a history of overworking and people getting ill, but also suicides. And there was a recent case of an organization, I think as recent as last year, and then everyone kind of rallying around trying to kind of understand what is going on. And there is an organization which I cite in my presentation, I think, let me just get the name right. An organized autonomy, it's a think tank. So they looked at the working practices of some of these consultancy firms and the 70-hour, 80-hour week that people who just join have to endure because they think that they can't get out of it. But when something happens, like someone kills themselves and there is a real problem, they start to pay attention. I don't know how much that really then it boils down to real change in culture. But it's understand what sparked my thought in that is about the culture. So it is a culture. So the problem sometimes is that the culture of the place needs to change so people can have a different experience of it. And cultural change is very very difficult. It's a long-term commitment. There are subcultures as well in organizations. There is an overarching culture, but there is a culture of the design department, of the IT department, as you mentioned. And they talk, they work differently. They sometimes have a different language. They don't understand each other, and so on. So that is a real, and that's a real opportunity for us if we're able to support organizations across all these different challenges that they may be experiencing.
Yes, I mentioned earlier, it would be helpful to know in your program recommendation of potentially maybe 6 workshops, what would you say the interval was between each one?
Depends on the level that I'm working with. So if I'm working with leaders and managers, I tend to do that monthly because I want them to implement things and think about. I mean, it really depends, and also be pragmatic about it. Ask them what works for them, because sometimes you've got this idea in your head that doesn't work for people, and you want to make sure that it works for them. But I would say it's strategic thinking and management. I tend to do monthly. If I'm working, depending on the issue on the ground, I tend to do it fortnightly. So if I'm working with parents, I tend to do it fortnightly, for example.
Oh, thanks, Sue. That's very helpful. And can I ask another question?
Yes.
Okay. Do you find there's a particular time of day? And then part B is your group coaching part in person and part remotely, the group, or are they all one or the other?
Well, I used to do a lot of face-to-face before the pandemic, and I'm yet to return to face-to-face. In fact, I'm returning in a couple of weeks to do some face-to-face work. And if I do face-to-face work, the sessions are longer. They're 2.5 hours. So people, they're taking time to get somewhere and so on. It makes worth their while. Sure. Either they're all face-to-face or they're all online, but that doesn't mean that you can't mix and match. No. You could do that if that was suitable for the people you're working with.
So for attendance, would you say it's a good idea or not to include like the working lunch, like 12 to 2 for some of these workshops? Would you prefer like a set morning or set afternoon?
It really depends, Susanna. And I deliver groups across the time, morning, afternoon, evening groups. I don't think there is a particular set of time, because it depends on what people are doing. And I think one of the challenges that we have, and we talk about the challenges, is that time commitment for people. But that is the same for one-to-one coaching anyway, is that they commit to that time and to be completely free of interruptions and so on. From my experience, I don't think there is a particular time that's better for people. Although I quite like the kind of early morning ones where people, get together at 8 o'clock and they feel that they can do that before they get on with their day, and they are fresh and so on, and they're not thinking about the things that happen just before they go on the call and so on. But that is my personal preference, as opposed to anything that's got any basis on other things. But you work with people and see what suits them.
Very helpful, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, folks, I'm going to have to go now because I've got to walk my dog before I get into another call. Otherwise, he will just go bonkers and I won't be able to do anything because he will start barking like mad. But it's been great to be here. If you need anything, if you have any questions that you haven't had a chance to ask, just feel free to get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to answer more questions and so on. And have a lovely time next week in the summit. And I'm hoping that some of you will embrace group coaching and be very excited about taking this word to people. So thank you for having me here, Nicola.
No, thank you very much for coming, Anna Paula, and for leading this discussion. It was really lovely to, have this wonderful Q&A session at the end as well, because this is everybody bringing their experiences and learning together is just so valuable. So thank you everybody here and everybody who's had to go, but thank you everybody for engaging in this discussion. I think we've all grown as a result of it. Thank you.
Take care. See you soon. Thank you. Thanks.
Put Anna's LinkedIn profile into the chat as well. Do connect Anna Paula's LinkedIn.
Please.
Do connect.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
She's super. There we go. And you can keep in touch then.
Thank you, everyone.